Thanks for being here. I know it's been a tough week schedule-wise, trying to maneuver things around. Everything's flying around at a fast pace, but we did just want to make sure that before we get to the end of the week here, we touch base with you folks, particularly regarding paid family medical leave and all that's been developing there. And I can't underscore this first point enough, that there is no deal as it stands today with regard to paid family medical leave and where things are at in terms of the negotiation. I know that the proponents are trying to present what they've voted out of committee as some type of compromise. It's really not anything very substantively different from what is really baked into this referendum that's kind of lingering out there in the ether, and the alleged threat that they have the signatures to put it forward. In my opinion, negotiating against ourselves because of that referendum is not any way to conduct good policy making here in the legislature. I think that what we need to do is put forward the best policy proposal for Maine people, Maine businesses, Maine families, regardless of what the socialists at the Maine People's Alliance have been doing in their spare time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to some of my colleagues who have been digging in on this issue to share some more about what's been happening and where things are at, and then we can do Q&A at the end as well as it relates to this and other issues circulating this building right now. So Senator Pouliot.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Senator Stewart. I'm Senator Matt Pouliot, represent Senate District 15, the towns of Augusta, China, Sydney, Vassalboro, Mount Vernon, and Belgrade, and I'm here today as the lead on the Labor and Housing Committee. Maine really does have a labor crunch, just like the rest of the country. LD 1964, while well-intentioned, really could continue to put more strain on our labor force, which is only going to exacerbate some of the issues we're facing here in Maine. We had kind of a philosophical discussion in the committee about how far to go with this bill. There is support across the board for giving mothers or fathers time with their kids when there's a newborn being brought home. I don't think that anybody contends that at all, and we certainly want to make sure that we're finding ways for this to happen. But unfortunately, this particular bill just goes too far. It's too expensive for the state of Maine. Really, the most appalling thing to me is that the majority of the committee, including the sponsor, our chair, Senator Tipping, had lamented back in March to the Appropriations Committee that they had no idea how much this bill would cost. They also said that they were upset that the funding for this legislation was not included in the governor's proposal, her change package for funding that's now being considered by the legislature. They all unanimously supported moving the bill forward, though, however, even though we don't have a clear understanding of the cost. What we do know, though, is that the bill would seek to add initially 25 new employees, an additional 11 after that, so somewhere in the mid-30s for new employees of the state. But we were just ranked the 10th weakest economy in the United States by Wallet Hub. So how is it that we can bring on a program like this and make sure that it's sustainable in the long run if we don't have really the people participating in the workforce to even make sure that it is sustainable? Our current leave laws are for employers with more than 15 employees, and this bill seeks to really reduce that number substantially. Senator Daughtry and I have served together now for a decade. We both got elected at the age of 25, and we've worked together on a lot of initiatives. But unfortunately, over that time, I've seen kind of a decaying and of a willingness to work together. Senator Daughtry had a bill in the 129ths that was exactly the bill that, or similar to the bill of legislation that they passed in New Hampshire. And when asked if she would consider a more sensible, moderate approach to her paid family medical leave bill, she said no. The bill that she herself sponsored 2 legislative sessions ago in the 129th is now something that doesn't apparently go far enough, and they're attempting to utilize the one-party majority that they have here at the State House to ram through a paid family medical leave bill that is just not something that our state can afford. So I'd be happy to talk with you more about this, but I think the bottom line is pretty simple. Republicans do want to make sure that individuals have the time that they need to take care of themselves or loved ones when emergencies arise, or in the event that there is some type of a planned medical event like the birth of a child, which is extremely important. We want to make sure that people can be there with them. But Maine does have a family medical leave in place now. It's just not paid. So people do have protections for their employment already under current law. And there are other options for disability plans available that people could, or employers could, avail themselves of. So it's important that we have everybody on the same playing field, and this legislation is going to continue to pick winners and losers in a way that's just not sustainable for the state.
Maine workers and Maine businesses are all struggling with the raging inflation. There is no possible way that Maine residents who are working for Maine small businesses want to have a tax hike, and this bill is a tax hike. It's a tax on both employees and employers, meaning the employees have a smaller paycheck and the employers have less money to work with in paying, because everybody's paying as much as they can to pull people into the workforce. This is just a $300 million tax hike with the promise of increased amounts coming out of paychecks if the program doesn't have sufficient funds for administration and benefit costs, which absolutely is a very strong possibility. Maine small businesses are in a workforce crisis. They can't find enough workers. If this bill passes, even small businesses under 15 employees will have to have this in place. And who are they going to replace these missing workers with? I think I have a great example from my family's small business, which I think is really a great model for what is happening in other small businesses, and they would be subject to this, businesses under 15 employees. When my son had his third child, he was the general manager of our family business, and we would love to have given him 6 weeks, 12 weeks off to be home with his family. But we had no one to replace him. We had been advertising for workers and hadn't had anyone applying. And if we gave him the time off, there was nobody to take his place. I would love to have him be able to have that time off. Obviously, as the grandmother of that baby, I wanted him to be able to stay home, but it was an impossibility for our small business. He had to take a much abbreviated vacation time with his family because the workers were not available to take his place. And what are Maine businesses supposed to do? They give someone the time off and they have to save that job for them. There's nobody applying for a 6-week or a 12-week job in this economy. So it leaves businesses of all sizes in really dire shape. And it hurts other workers too, because when businesses are shorthanded, the people that are willing to work and are showing up every day have to pick up the slack for the people that aren't there. And there's a limit to how far this can go. This bill is so extreme that it is devastating for large businesses and small businesses alike. It's also prone to misuse. The average Mainer earns only 6 weeks worth of earnings over the course of the year to qualify for 12 weeks of annual leave. Employees could qualify for leave for anyone, get that, anyone they consider family. Well, you could say the lady across the street you considered family. There's no set parameters. The department isn't going to be going out checking on how you consider this person family. The employer certainly doesn't have the ability to come to your house and say, who are you looking after? Is this truly a family member? This bill is poorly written and would be a disaster for Maine businesses.
Hi, I'm Representative Dick Bradstreet from Vassalboro. I serve on the Labor and Housing Committee, and we heard this bill just a couple of weeks ago. The hearing brought forth many questions, almost as many questions as we had before. We've heard a little bit about what the potential cost will be, but there's other things that factor in as well. I've had some business people ask me, if I have a small business and I have, we'll say, 8 or 9 employees, and 2 or 3 of them need to take off at the same time, how do I manage my business? They say we can hire somebody else, but is that realistic, as you just heard? And even beyond that, when that person does come back and the fill-in worker is gone, do I have to pay the unemployment benefits? Does that come against my record? That's just one unanswered question that needs to be addressed. The sponsor of the bill also, when asked, is your bill different much from the proposed bill that's sponsored by the Maine People's Alliance to go out to referendum? And she said some, but the representative from that alliance said other than the 16-week that they have, as opposed to the 12 weeks that the legislation has, there's not much difference. And if theirs is extreme, then this one is extreme as well. It also goes from what we have now is, I think it's like 5 weeks unpaid every 2 years, to 8 weeks every year. 12 weeks every year. That's extreme. It's an extreme change. There are a lot of things that just won't fit our economy and our business community. So I think it's something we need to really take a good, hard look at. Good legislation requires time. This is a big bill. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we need to do that. It's our responsibility to do that. Thank you.
And I want to be clear too, Republicans aren't saying no to any version of paid family leave. We're saying, and you've heard us in the press, both in written form, on the radio, and certainly you were on Maine Calling earlier this week, sharing an alternative that makes sense, and an alternative that our neighbor to the south has been successfully implementing, and one that would be a voluntary-based model. In fact, as you heard Senator Pouliot mention, it was proposed by a Democrat here in Maine, the very same individual who's now pushing for this extreme agenda here with paid family medical leave. So I don't think it's a far cry to say that there's alternatives out there that we should and can be looking at adopting that make a lot more sense for Maine than what is currently on the table. So with that, happy to answer any questions folks have about this subject or any other.
Do you know what percentage of workers in the New Hampshire system actually take paid leave in that voluntary system that you prefer?
We can get that data for you as well. There's some folks
It just started in January, Bill, so.
Yeah.
I mean, for the sponsor of this bill,
Yeah.
for the sponsor of this bill to propose an opt-in program to the Maine State Legislature in the 129th Legislature, LD 883, okay? Apparently, just 4 years ago and a couple months, that approach was sensible to the sponsor of this bill. But now, with Democrat majorities in the House and Senate, and a Democrat governor that's not seeking re-election, that doesn't go far enough. And now that she wants to take this approach for paid family medical leave, which is something that we would love to be able to help. You know, I think what is challenging for Republicans a lot of times is that we see this as a problem too. No one's saying that people shouldn't, as Senator Guerin said, be able to spend that time with family when there's a newborn at home or something comes up, right? But what we're saying is we need to do this in a way that actually will work. I mean, there's a guy who ran for president one time, Andrew Yang, and he had math on his shirt. I mean, this is what it's about. The math just doesn't add up for our demographics in the state. Unfortunately, among the oldest in the nation, we just don't have the workforce to backfill when people are gone for these extended period of time without any workaround.
Would you support what Governor Mills's administration has said she would support in their testimony, which was making eligibility at 6 months rather than 6 weeks, and capping the pay during leave at 66% of salary rather than 90%? Would that work?
So what I will say is that I think Republicans remain open to negotiations and discussing a path forward. But when I asked in committee if we could have a robust debate about changes that could be made, my my former co-chair of the Youth Caucus and somebody I've worked with for a long time basically said, no.
What do you think of those ideas, though, that the governor's commissioner testified?
I don't want to speak for the whole committee. I think that in general, we want to find ways to make sure that Maine employees feel that they have some protections. And to some extent, Maine law already does that. But also making sure, if we're going to ask people to have babies, then we ought to make sure that they have the coverage that's needed to be around that newborn after it's born, Put our money where our mouth is. So I'm not opposed to having those kind of conversations. What I am opposed to is forcing Maine employers across the board to basically take on a very, very, very significant change in policy without having a time period to adjust to that and or the resources, meaning the actual people, to fill the positions. We need to invest in our workforce before we can start having policies like this that then would require more of the workforce that we don't have.
Is there anything other than the voluntary program that the Republicans would support? I know you don't want to get too much specific, but if it went down to 8 weeks instead of 12, is that what paid?
Yeah, I mean, I speaking for myself, I'm open to a voluntary approach. I mean, and if an employer,
would you be able to anything mandatory, or is it only voluntary?
I think
Depends on the size.
I think it depends on.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the reasons why referendums are a terrible way to make public policy. And now you have the advocates for this bill essentially holding a gun to legislators' heads, saying, if you don't do this, we're going to run our referendum. And you know how the referendum signatures are collected? Most of them are with paid people who go and sit at the polls on election day. And they're like, hey, do you think Maine should have paid leave, and whatever their question is, generally pretty basic, not very descriptive about the total policy. Would you sign this? I mean, I think Representative Bradstreet actually signed on to having the referendum go out to the people. I mean, it's a big thing, that people want the people to have a say in it. We do too. But the reality is that asking a question about a referendum at a ballot box without the full context is akin to us walking in here with a title to a bill and walking straight into the legislature just to vote on it without any kind of discussion,
Isn't that a risk now? I mean, as you said, you put it as putting it.
No, I don't see it as a risk. I mean, I know that some of the advocates who are here with us here today in the room would like us to think that this is, hey, we have no other option, but that's not true. One legislature doesn't bind the next, and one poorly passed law at referendum doesn't mean that has to stay on the books. Look at the marijuana law that was passed at referendum. The legislature came in and was like, wow, there's a lot of problems with this. We need to make fixes to it. And I suspect that's what would happen. The problem is we've become an us versus them situation in politics, and it's only gotten worse in the last 10 years, where it's like, well, if we can't get buy into this, then we're just going to force it through with referendum, right? And what happens is we have a lot of policies then that need to be fixed or changed, and people learn new things. For the sponsor of this bill to say, oh, well, the legislature didn't support my opt-in voluntary approach in 2019, so instead I have to go this route, or the advocates for the referendum are pushing for this, so this is a sensible approach to take in the legislature. To me, that's just a false case to be making. It's instead, let's say, what can we get bipartisan support for to be able to move forward? I mean, this legislature and the governor are not always going to be all Democrat, most likely in the state, as much as some people might like that. And there are policies like this that, if they don't get bipartisan buy-in and we move collectively together on implementing, that eventually they get changed by future legislatures. And we would rather have a policy that's sensible, that fits Maine, that we can move forward with in a way that is sustainable.
One last question, and then we got to wrap for the day.
And which party controls this place in
Budget.
under 29?
Budget?
Negotiations, what's your understanding of how things are going?
We haven't heard anything yet from the other side. We put our proposal forward a week ago at this point, and still nothing back from the Democrats in terms of what different options. We even gave optionality in our proposal for different ways that we could get meaningful tax reductions for particularly the lower echelons and that first chunk of income that you make. And we have yet to hear back. There is allegedly a meeting scheduled later today. At some point, it was supposed to happen, well, right after session. No word yet, and the House is going in soon. So if we are going to have any hope for that, it's going to have to happen right off here. So if we learn anything there, keep you posted. But I expect it'll be kind of a quiet weekend, and then back here Monday morning to continue hammering away at it and hopefully get some of these log jams broken up. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Hope you have a great weekend. All right.